In this video, I will be diving into part 2 of this 3-part series in the Seven Swords story. It is very important that you watch part 1 if you are to have a full understanding and grasp about the events and occurrences we are about to dive into shortly. Due to the long nature of this story, I am unable to give you a synopsis now, so it is very important that you watch part 1. With that being said, I will jump right off from where I left last. When we last left off, Gaynor Sunderland, who, as we remember, is Marion Sunderland's daughter, and who was also a very highly sensitive psychic, was able to attune to the broadsword and was able to gain valuable information surrounding the past and recent history of the sword, being able to give a more accurate description on when it was manufactured, along with a series of other strange anomalies surrounding it. Due to her attunement to the sword, it would eventually lead them to a place known as Dunstall Castle. Although nothing conclusive was found at this location, they did find a subtle clue which would eventually lead Graham Phillips on an independent voyage to another nearby location in the adjoining county known as the Swans Neck.
This clue was revealed to them only when, after referencing some documented historical accounts detailing various titles and surnames Queen Mary of Scots went by, it was revealed that she most often was referred to as the Swan by members of the Catholic Church. So it only seemed natural to investigate the nearby location known as the Swans Neck, considering it was within the boundaries of the Warwickshire area. Graham Phillips would independently travel to the Swans Neck and begin his excavation. After phoning the others, he would rejoin them on the footbridge at the Knight's Pool, where, as we remember, is where the broadsword was found. However, he would remain silent about his discovery for the time being. After giving the rest of the crew the impression that nothing was to be found in or around the Swan's Neck, the party would return to Marion Sunderland's house in a state of frustration and despondency. However, Graham was withholding a monumental secret.
Upon arriving at the house, Graham would give everyone time to settle down before revealing anything. He first headed upstairs to study his find with the most prolific psychic out of the entire group, that being Gaynor Sunderland. It wasn't long before Graham descended the stairwell to rejoin everyone, with Gaynor close by his side, as he finally reveals to everyone that he did in fact find the Meonia Stone. As unbelievable as it may sound, we must remember two things before moving forward. The first thing is that there are at least 5 or 6 psychic mediums which make up this party of treasure hunters, meaning that with their combined efforts, it is absolutely plausible that the imagery and information they received psychically did indeed originate from a valid source. The second important fact to remember is that Collins and Graham literally spent weeks doing extensive research into the historical literature involving the various figures said to have been either in possession or connection with the Meonia Stone. So, to rule out the possibility of this discovery should be made cautiously. In October of 1979, Collins, Graham, and the rest of the members making up this search party did indeed find the green stone. Pulling it out, Graham goes into detail about how he was intuitively led to the spot in question where the stone was buried at the Swan's Neck. The stone was found inside of a small black casket, and within this casket was the green stone itself, along with a small black cube of unrefined stone. Graham had the overwhelming feeling not to physically touch the black cube, as he suspected that within it contained some sort of spirit guardian, and so he simply cast it into the River Avon, which flowed through the Swan's Neck. So with this discovery, we have the broadsword discovered at the Knight's Pool, the casket containing the green stone found at the Swan's Neck, and the green stone itself. For the next several months, Collins, Graham, and Marion Sunderland continued their research on the history behind the stone and the sword. After taking the sword to a local antique dealer, it was revealed that the sword unearthed under the footbridge at the Knight's Pool was only 100 years old based on the model and design, meaning it wasn't the original Meonia sword concealed by Humphrey Packington back in the 1500s, but rather a much more recently crafted imitation of it. This revelation was a shock to the EarthQuest members because it meant that there was a more recent Victorian connection to the Greenstone story, which acted as a sort of missing link between what they knew and what was still up for speculation. Around this same period of time, Graham has been receiving a plethora of more inspired psychic material revolving various historical figures said to have been in connection with the Meonia or Green Stone, whichever way you want to call it. And one of these groups was an offshoot Rosicrucian movement known as the Fire Phoenix Group, which possessed a significant stone artifact known as the Winged Dragon, and that the primary location where they conducted their religious rites and ceremonies was at a location of great geographical significance known as Biddulph Grange. What you are about to see next is video footage of Grant Phillips from 2019, as he had just recently created a YouTube channel where he revisits some of the historical sites that he had initially encountered back in the 1980s, as he gives a narrated account of the different locations and historical monuments that he came across during his initial visit to Biddulph Grange back in the
mock
1980s.
Egyptian tomb that stands in the garden that was built when Mary was a child in the 1850s. First, we only had legends and old rumours to go by, but now we have found documentation to prove that during the 1800s this building was used to hold occult ceremonies, which were referred to at the time euphemistically as rustic fates. A long, dank corridor, its walls painted red, runs deep inside, to arrive at a central chamber, and beyond that, this tiny room containing a single stone statue, the Ape of Thoth.
It was here at Biddulph Grange where a multitude of different religious sects over the generations had conducted various ceremonies and rituals. But over time, the site had gradually deteriorated from its former state due to certain occult groups desecrating the energy matrix of the site in more recent times. And this would have direct impact on Gaynor and Graham when the group visited Biddulph Grange to investigate it in September of 1980, exactly 1 year after Collins and Graham initially found the Victorian sword at the Knight's Pool. So what happened upon arriving at Biddulph Grange was Graham, Terry Allen, Collins, Marion, and Gaynor would begin exploring the grounds. All party members were surprised at the strange scenery and architecture found at Biddulph Grange, particularly the Egyptian statues and temples placed in different corners of the garden. It was at one of these temples where Gaynor and Graham both simultaneously began experiencing headaches and illness as a result of negative energy permeating the atmosphere. It can only be assumed that because these two are among the most sensitive psychics out of the party, they are rendered physically ill from coming into such close proximity of a desecrated temple. The party was under close observation during their visit to Biddulph Grange, and whether they were being monitored by representatives of this mysterious occult group known as the Wheel or not were never confirmed. For the next several chapters, Graham and Collins will follow up on their knowledge of the history and significance of the Green Stone. Following the death of the pharaoh Akhenaten in the year 1350 BC, a long lineage of successors would claim the power of the stone over many generations in an attempt to maintain the one true God philosophy that was established by Akhenaten. However, not long after his death, the empire of Egypt would be overthrown by Babylonian conquerors, enslaving the people of Egypt and forcing them to renounce their faith or face execution. This caused many of the original Egyptians to flee their motherland, which is how the story ties into the biblical story of Moses and the Exodus. Over several hundreds of years, the power of the stone would eventually migrate to the Midlands of Britain, where a descendant of the original bloodline of the House of Akhenaten was still in possession of the stone during this time, eventually marrying into the Irish royal family and establishing the religious order of the Celts as we know them today. And it is through this connection that forms our basis of understanding as to why the greenstone could be found in the Midlands of modern-day Britain. This information, although was still only the tip of the iceberg concerning the extensive rabbit hole of history, Collins would gradually begin to unfold. Collins digs deeper and deeper in his understanding of the ancient Egyptian historical records. However, it isn't until we come across the first and only ever female king, named Sa-Re, do things start to get quite interesting. Sa-Re, daughter of Amenemhet III, was the successor of her brother Amenemhet IV, and the last pharaoh of the 12th dynasty. Her reign only lasted for 3 years, and according to historical accounts, her time as pharaoh would seem rather inconsequential, which would only go on to deepen the curious affair that would shortly play out. On the night of Wednesday, July 22nd, 1981, Terry Shodden and Martin Ratcliffe, one of Terry's business partners, would arrive at Grant Phillips' rented-out one-room apartment. Unexpectedly, as they walk in on Graham in the middle of a ritual invocation, where they find him in a semi-hypnotic state, sketching the image of an Egyptian female pharaoh named Sa-Re on the northern wall of his room, as there were ritual candles spread out across the floor, along with an almost tangible and curious atmosphere beginning to build up in the apartment. Totally bewildered by what they were witnessing, Terry cautiously asks Graham what he is doing. Graham replies, saying that he has been having a series of uncontrollable visions and imagery flood his mind for the past few days, involving the 12th dynasty female pharaoh Sa-Re. He doesn't know why, considering she hasn't been mentioned as a character of interest prior surrounding the whole Green Stone story. Uncertain as to what to do, Graham reassures them to just stand back and watch as he finishes his invocation. For the next hour, Terry Shodden and Martin Ratcliffe would observe in silence as Graham finishes his sketch of the goddess-like figure. What would happen next is a bizarre sequence of events. Only moments after the sketch is completed and Graham turns around to acknowledge them, they suddenly hear a loud, thunderous banging noise coming from somewhere nearby. The sound could be compared to a car crashing into the side of a brick wall. As they frantically search the perimeter of the house, they find nothing, until they finally decide to check the cellar in the lower level part of the house. As Graham, Terry, and Ratcliffe all stand around the latch leading into the cellar, they take a moment to pause and compose themselves. In this same moment, the floor dash door latch to the cellar violently swings open and crashes back down shut in the blink of an eye. All three men frantically run out of the house and go down the driveway to escape the haunted house freak show. Turning around, all three men, along with a random man walking his dog, would all take witness as they see what seems to be the illuminated image of Sa-Re from inside the house as the curtains flutter wildly to momentarily reveal her presence from within the confines of the house before quickly falling back down into place to hide the interior of the house. Moments later, the dim glow from the 4 different candles situated in the corners of the house would all suddenly extinguish at the same time, as all 4 men look on in horror and disbelief to the paranormal events which have just transpired. I believe it is time we stop to pause and look at the entirety of what we know so far. It would seem as though all the historical records involving the Green Stone can be traced back to ancient Egypt, with the stone's history traveling down the Akhenaten bloodline until eventually migrating to the Midlands of Britain, where an offshoot group from the same tribe will go on to eventually form the nation of the Celtic peoples, or Celts, as we know them today. This concludes the end of part 2 of this 3-part series. Now that we have a deeper understanding of the history surrounding the Green Stone, I will touch on the current affairs revolving it and the people opposed to Collins and his EarthQuest group in part 3. Please subscribe and stay tuned.